This is Remote Ruby.
Have you any remote idea to the meaning of the word?
Hello.
Hey.
What's up?
What's good?
Oh, nothing.
Yeah,
All right.
I was going to say nothing.
Welcome to hell.
Nah, everything's great. Come on.
Everything is awesome. Everything
Things are
is
looking
cool.
up at least.
Things are looking up. We were reading the paper last night, and like COVID hospitalizations are lowest they've been since last May. And we're like, this is good. We like this. So
Wait, you were reading the physical newspaper?
sorry. I was reading
I
a
also wanted
digital
to know about that.
a digital paper. We actually have a news paper's not the right word. We have a news and they're digital only. So I was reading that.
I was like, wow, what time did we jump back into?
Yeah, my paperboy comes every morning at 5, and right after I get the milk off the porch, I sit down and read the paper.
Is he all pixelated and throws newspapers through your window and the dogs chase him? And
Oh, I love
Nah,
that game.
it's in black and white as well.
Good Lord. All right. Well, hey.
Yeah.
Hey.
So today on the show, we are happy to announce that we have a great guest, Fred Schott of Skypack and Snowpack fame. So Fred, you want to give us an introduction?
You got it. You covered it. That's it. Have a great day. I'll see you all later.
Yeah.
done.
No, thank you all for having me. Excited to be here. My mom is getting her COVID vaccine next week, so I'm also in a good mood about it.
Nice.
Hey, that's great to hear.
Yeah, gotta give one out for the moms.
Yeah.
Yeah, Snowpack, Skypack, those are the two projects that I mainly work on these days, both in the kind of JavaScript tooling space, web developer tooling space. So both kind of came out of a very JavaScript focused, what is the future of web development? But what we're seeing now, almost 2 years into the project, is that really these are trends and kind of new technologies that benefit everyone, including the Rails community. So we have a couple of members of our community that are big Rails people that are looking at kind of what does Webpacker look like in a post-Webpack dominance world. And there's some exciting stuff going on.
Yeah. One of the reasons we wanted to have you on is because I've been following Snowpack and Skypack for a while now. And the general vibe in the Rails community is we don't love Webpacker at all. Some of us love it even less than that.
Yeah, it's a hostage situation.
Yeah, it is a hostage situation. And it's kind of funny. Right before we had scheduled you, DHH actually started talking about Skypack a little bit and talking about how he's looking forward to this new age of not having to bundle JavaScript. So I'm very excited about it. We wanted to bring you on so that all of our listeners can learn about it too and get excited about Webpack going bye-bye.
Yeah.
Crossing figures.
Yeah, it's an exciting time. And yeah, bundling is one of those things where it's been a assumed kind of requirement for a lot of projects. And that's really what we first started out to take a look at, was like a lot of what these new technologies around ESM. And so ESM is really just, if you use JavaScript, it's that import export syntax. So that ability to, like, in JavaScript itself, tell the browser or tell your tooling like what I'm trying to import, what I'm trying to export, what is the interface of this code that I'm writing. That actually just unlocks a ton of doors where, like, Webpack is no longer required. It's not something you need to run. This is code that the browser will understand, which is not where we've been in the React community or the Svelte even. Like, they all assumed tooling's required, so why not throw a bundler at it, which takes a lot of complexity into the picture just by default.
Right. So I was listening to a conference talk you gave, and you were talking about the third age of JavaScript. And my first reaction was like, what? There were two. There had already been two. So I was wondering if you could kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. That is a phrase I shamelessly stole from Sean Wang, who had a great blog post on that subject. That talk was really trying to build on that. And where he leaves off that post is something new is coming. We don't know what, but there's change in the air. Snowpack and Skypack are very much about, this is the change that we see, kind of throwing everything not out of place, but just new things are possible now in a way they weren't. Things have been changing over time, but like big changes seem to be happening now at the foundational, like, what does the code that we're writing look like level? Yeah. So I don't want to misquote Sean in what the first two ages are, but really kind of that sense of like early web development. We were really throwing scripts together, get your script tags on the page, get everything in the right order. jQuery has to come first because the next thing's going to depend on jQuery, and that's going to depend on that. And all of a sudden you have this like really hard to kind of parse out what depends on what flow in your code. And so you could solve that by bringing in like UMD or require.js, those like early module systems that were all presented by the user to the browser. That's how I see it, is that was kind of the first like Wild West of web programming. And then the second age has been a little bit more of the like node, NPM, use that require function, that module exports, Webpack. All of that is about, okay, let's choose a module system. It's going to be the one that Node uses. And let's bring in all this tooling to make that better to work with. But at least we all have one common paradigm now. So there's convenience in there, but a lot of complexity in that as well.
Right. It is very complex. The Rails developers love jQuery. I came around a little too late to have that affection for it. But with Webpack, it instantly became way harder because all of a sudden you're used to, you have your require at the very beginning of your file. And now that doesn't work. And you have to inject it correctly into Webpack and you have to expose the global variables. And all of a sudden, all of your jQuery scripts that you may have been hoarding since an unknown period before time, they don't work anymore because they're written in a style of JavaScript that Webpack is like, nope, sorry.
Yep.
Got nothing for you.
Yeah, that was like Webpack gave us NPM and an ecosystem of, you know, 1 million plus packages, but at the cost of anything that didn't fit that mold was essentially pushed off to the side. Get on board or don't. So yeah, that was disruptive for the web, especially because it wasn't an ecosystem that was designed with the web in mind, at least originally. Like Common.js, which Node and the React project is built on, and a lot of these NPM ecosystems are all kind of forced into, came from a place of we want something that actually is designed for the server, not for the browser. Like they made design decisions in those early days specifically to alienate the browser. Not maliciously, but just there are shortcuts you can take when you assume a server. Lookups can be just a lot more kind of dynamic versus a browser needs to know where it's looking for a file and needs to be able to go out and get everything asynchronously in parallel. Totally different constraints. And so, yeah, anything that didn't fit that mold was just kicked out the door.
Right. You just mentioned Common.js. Can you kind of give us a little explanation of what ESM is? Because for a lot of us, we're still trying to figure out, or I'm still trying to figure out ES6. So now we've got ESM. It's not foreign, but it's like a foreign concept until you kind of dig into it. So if you could touch on that, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, it's one of those things that sounds like a scary new thing to learn, but it's like most likely what a lot of us have been writing up to this point without even noticing it. It's something that's existed for a long time. READMEs are written in it, kind of assuming it's becoming a lot more just built into JavaScript and how we see JavaScript language. Essentially, it's that import statement and export. So it's your ability to say that this file that I'm writing is a module. And so if you were using the require function, now you're using just the word import. If you were using like module.exports or like window dot whatever you were doing in the kind of before times, that now you are using this export keyword and saying like, I'm explicitly importing and exporting these things. That lets the browser say, this is the interface. This is the module. These are the things it exposes to the world. And these are the things that it's like looking for from the world to import into it. So you get these really kind of clear built into the language ways to describe what you're building and how it should all load from each other. So for developers, it's just the way we've been writing JavaScript. It came out as a part of, I think, that ES6 spec. So it actually was kind of originally a part of that. It's not new in that sense that it's a brand new technology, but it's new in that like when you start to leverage that, your tooling gets smarter, the browser gets smarter, and you can start to assume just a much more kind of explicit contract between the code that you're writing, the tooling, and the browser all understanding the same things about it.
Gotcha. So the modules thing is a little bit foreign as well. And once you like look at it and understand it, it kind of makes a lot of sense, but it's essentially a module and you would define it on your script tag. So it would be a script type equals module. And that allows you to kind of use this modern JavaScript that the browser can't actually interpret by itself. Is that somewhat correct?
Yeah, definitely. It's that idea of you're opting into the new thing. And JavaScript did this. You ever saw like use strict as just a phrase in JavaScript? It's kind of the same idea. Tell us you want the new stuff and we'll give you the new stuff, but you got to tell us. What's nice about it though, is that once you do that somewhere, so just at the top level, so you script type equals module and you start writing code, everything inherits from that. So in there you say, okay, I want to import my like main application code, or I want to import a shopping cart or import anything. It's going to follow that all the way down. So anything from that kind of what it imports and what they import all the way down this application is going to assume type module. So you opt in and really only in one or two spots, depending on how you build your application. It's only at the start, at the top. And yeah, it's basically just saying, okay, I want to use this new way to tell the browser what I'm doing. And then the browser is able to read the code and actually analyze it and then go out and load my dependencies for me. So if you've used just like script tags being kind of thrown in the list, if you've used UMD, or there have been so many attempts at this over the time. And then CommonJS saying like, we're not even going to try use tooling to use this require function, this module.exports. All of these past attempts have assumed something's going to make this work in the browser. And this new technology is essentially the browser saying, you don't have to worry about that anymore. Use this import and use this export that I'm giving you, and I'll be able to understand that. I'll be able to load your code for you. And you can get rid of all of this tooling that you've brought into the space to fill the void of not having a native module system. So the idea of dependencies even having been a foreign concept to the browser, now natively supported, gives the browser a lot more control over just, okay, I got to load this application and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to load it all.
And we could get to a point where you don't have to run npm install on your local machine.
That's where Skypack comes in. So if you've ever used like an unpackage or a CDN.js or a JS deliver, ways to load code from a CDN. So a globally stored, hosted place where JavaScript script files can live. So yeah, it's been a great place to load jQuery from. And like jQuery had their own CDN, like Google had a CDN. There was like the early like CDN wars of who has the best CDN, at least in like the non-Rails kind of super JavaScript tooling world. That all went away as we all started bundling. Because you have these tools, why not just bring it all locally? There's no convenience there when I assume I need a big tool to bundle this all together. What Skypack does though is says, okay, well, let's look at this problem. Now that we don't need that bundling step, now that we can give our code to the browser in a way the browser can do the loading and load our application for us and go and find our dependencies for us. All of a sudden now, well, when I say import React or Vue, where am I getting that from? That's still something the browser doesn't really understand. So there's this concept that you can't just, now that we're in this magic world, say, okay, import React, because what does that even mean? Where are you getting React from? Where are you getting Vue? Where are you getting that package from? So even as we build for the browser in this new syntax, this new technology, we still have to give the browser a really explicit place to go. So that would be like a relative file, like / go over to this path, or it lives here on my web server instead. You've got to give it a URL. But what that opens the door for is you can give it any URL. So you can actually give it a URL at a different domain, a different host. So similar to how you could host jQuery, you can now actually host something that is ESM itself, and then you can reference it from an import statement. So in your code itself, you say, I want to import jQuery from this URL, and it comes back as ESM. So instead of being a script tag that you just have to like kind of reference somehow off the Windows object or some other really implicit, how do I get this thing that I've loaded? Now in your code, you're saying, I want to get this package from this URL, and it all just works.
Yeah. And I've seen the magic, and DHH actually has an example when he rolled out Turbo, which is kind of this new, I'm sure you heard about it. Everyone was talking about on Twitter. Yeah. Some people very happy and some absolutely offended. But in his example, they have Stimulus, which is their library that they use at Basecamp. And instead of using Webpack in their example app, they were just using Skypack to pull in Stimulus because they only needed a tiny little bit. And I've done this after I saw him doing it. Oh, I only need 4 lines from Stimulus to do the thing I want to do. I don't even need Webpack.
Yeah.
And it's magical. I love it.
It's a totally different way to think about how you build an app, because again, it's when you assume there's all this tooling, you just kind of, well, why not? I'm just throwing logs on a fire that's already going. But if you come back from a place of, okay, well, I have a script tag on the page, and what should that be doing? You end up in this like much more, I just want to opt into these little bits of JavaScript. I want to load Preact or load React, and I want to build some UI. But in terms of simplicity of tooling and also just like amount of code that you end up shipping to the user, you just have a lot more. You're coming from this like baseline 0 world versus like baseline big blob of JavaScript that Webpack or other bundlers end up creating.
Right.
There are definitely some like limits to it with performance. Like it's not a magic bullet, but in terms of where you're starting from, it's such a better starting point in terms of performance and just only bringing in what you need.
I was going to ask, a lot of the stuff that people like using, like Webpacker and Rails and stuff, is you can write more modern JavaScript. So with ESM, we don't need to use Babel as much as we used to. Is there use for Babel still in the ESM world or not? I was just kind of curious.
there's an interesting relationship between this, which is the idea of I, as a developer, have a modern browser, right? I'm using Chrome or I'm using Safari. Like I'm using a browser from the last year in any flavor. As a developer, that means that I can assume, yes, I'm supported. I can assume the latest, like the code that I'm writing actually pretty closely matches what's supported by the browser. But I still want to make sure I'm building a site that works really well for the end user. So they end up having a bit of a different profile in terms of they are maybe not on the most modern browser. Maybe they need to go back a couple of years to find their browser in the release notes. But also, they're not doing local development or develop within this network where you can kind of assume I'm doing development and everything's loading, the browser's taking care of it. It's really fast. If you're going over a global network, all of a sudden, every time you request a file ends up actually costing you time. And if you're doing that, even though they're small files, even though there's been a lot of advances in like the networking HTTP2, HTTP3, the technology is there, but still you're fighting against just the speed of light and networking. If every time a user downloads their site, that they have to kind of resolve this whole dependency tree. So it's one of these things where it's not a silver bullet, but it really simplifies a lot of the pieces of the puzzle. And you can then bring in the remaining kind of what you need when you need it. So if I only care about speed and performance for that end user, then that's when I'll bring back the bundler, something like Webpacker, because I care about their performance. I actually do want to minimize the number of files. For me in development, now I'm resolving the tree and I'm adding and changing. And every time I build a file, I don't need to go rerun a bundler. Everything's in line in that one file that I just changed. So go fetch a new version of that and I'm good to go.
So how does Snowpack tie into this? So Snowpack is another tool that you have created and it's a successor of Pika, or I think you said on some podcasts it's pronounced Pika, but I like Pika. I like Pika a lot better.
I like Pika so much more. And I only realized like the dictionary word is Pika, which I only learned way too late. So it's Pika. Dictionaries, if NPM can be all lowercase, then we can pronounce it Pika.
That's true. I first found Snowpack right when you were switching off of Pika. And I remember finding some of the Pika pack and some of those tools that you had created to help build node modules. And I was like, holy crap. I was like, this is a game changer. So yeah, let's talk about Snowpack. What is Snowpack?
It all starts at that place of Pika was this like umbrella project of like ESM is cool and new and let's explore what this means for web developers. So Skypack was a direct kind of spin off of that, and Snowpack as well. We essentially spun anything that was like connected with developers out into separate projects. So if Skypack is the like load anything you want on demand as you want it from the NPM ecosystem, from that CDN, Snowpack is build your website using this tool. It's like a Webpacker alternative in that ecosystem. So it's the tooling that you would use to build a site, because while we like the idea of importing and using native browser tools and ESM is in the browser, that limitation I mentioned, like I write the word import React because that's what's convenient for me. The browser is not going to understand that. So we still find ourselves with this middle ground of we don't need as much tooling as before, but we still have these conveniences that maybe aren't browser native yet. Although again, the browser is evolving at a much faster pace. There's great people working on that. So even that import React is something that the browser wants to support with import maps. If you've heard of those, I think just landed in Chrome. So the amount of tooling we need is shrinking and shrinking, but we still find users like the ability to import something that maybe the browser doesn't support. So that's where Snowpack kind of fits into this picture. It exists to fill in the gaps where what we're trying to shoot for as little tooling as possible. We're just kind of providing the developer experience of that modern environment. So we're still shipping things to the browser for the browser to go out and import, export, and resolve. We're not bundling on every change. And what that lets us do is that then, well, because we're not doing all of this tooling, we can actually ship something that's much faster for you as the user. So when you make a change to a file, we're just going to ship that one file change up to the browser. Versus today, the bundler has to kind of, okay, I'm going to go fit this back into the bundle, rebuild maybe multiple files. Several seconds per update is not unheard of in a bundled toolchain.
It's even worse for us right now. At work, we keep packing and packing and packing.
Yep.
And I'll save a file. It'll do the automatic reload, but
yeah,
I'm like, okay, I'm going to read a chapter of a book. So Webpack's actually like going through and rebuilding everything. So Snowpack's only looking at what specific changed, or how does that work?
So if the site has been loaded in what we call unbundled, so there's no bundling, you wrote a file, that file is getting shipped to the browser. It might be built, like you might turn your JSX into just classic JavaScript, but at the end of the day, that one file still exists as one file in the browser, so that when you go and change it, all we need to do is look at that one file, rebuild it, and then push it up to the browser. So making that work nicely is what kind of Snowpack does. But that bigger problem that you pointed to of just like waiting multiple seconds, that is the like pitch of Snowpack in a nutshell, is that we're writing a language that is meant to be run directly in the browser. There's no like compiling step that we have to hide behind. It's bad that that's not easier. So that's what we've fallen into.
It kind of just creeps up on you. It takes a little longer each day, and then it's a year. And like I have a fresh Rails project with Webpacker, and I'll save a file, and I'll go to the browser like, oh, it didn't reload, but no, it did reload. I just don't have any JavaScript in there yet. So like it's still fast because I haven't looked up the project. Yeah.
It's a big kind of what does it mean when you only build, I make a change and I only need to look at that one file. It's exactly that problem. A bundler is always responsible for everything. So as your project grows, more and more files get added to it. It's having to manage more and more at the one time versus essentially all we say is that start us up, spin us up, and we'll just start building things as you ask for them. So you could have 1 million files in your project. We're only ever going to build as much as you've requested on the browser. So grow as much as you want. We don't actually, our performance story by definition doesn't change as you grow.
I can actually give a good example of this. So I use Snowpack on my personal site with Bridgetown, which is a Ruby static site generator. And if I change my JavaScript or if I change my HTML, Snowpack reloads my browser in under a second, in a few milliseconds. If I change my CSS, because I'm using Tailwind, and then Tailwind is getting a lot slower. And there's a lot of ways people can fix that, just so you folks out there know that you can make it faster. But without trying to make it faster, you hit save in your Tailwind file, and all of a sudden it's got to go post CSS, and it's like a massive file that it's got to run. So that can take a second or two, but that doesn't happen unless I save or change my CSS file, which is super nice. So, and now instead of every time I save any file, it has to go do the whole song and dance, and I have to wait for Tailwind and post CSS and Babel and their friends and cousins and everything. Only the file I changed gets reloaded. And depending on what that file is, could be several milliseconds. It could be a little bit longer depending on what you're doing, but that's a great way to kind of visualize what you were kind of describing.
Yeah. And I think that's actually the perfect illustration of it's really the model. Like we're not doing anything magic behind the scenes. When all you have to do is build one file, you're good to go. If all of a sudden you build one file, but then you now need to do X, Y, and Z, run Tailwind, which does scan your whole project and rebuild. Yeah, it's as soon as you fall out of the model, you're back in the old world. So it's really, we're trying to paradigm shift into more tooling that does individual one-to-one files. And if anything doesn't, at least you've quarantined that behavior within that problem space.
So what are some of the issues that you've kind of seen as people try to transition away from Webpack to Snowpack? One thing that my buddy mentioned to me is that the tilde situation where in Webpack that basically says, hey, if you append a tilde to something, that means it's in the node modules. With Snowpack, that's not true.
Yeah, we changed that because we just wanted to be a little more close to not magic. And we saw that as a bit of magic, but we then ended up thinking that we were special, just created our own different magic. We try to have CSS and NPM all and Node and JavaScript all match the same kind of, if you reference something by name, we're going to consider that it's a package. If you reference it by path, we're going to consider that's a URL or a path. So /foo.css, great. That's a relative file. We'll go find that. Foo.css, well, there's no /. We think this is actually a package and we'll go try there. That's actually a great, perfect way to frame kind of what are the discrepancies. I'd say the biggest one is just that we're a newer tool. So Webpack is an ecosystem. It feels like 10 plus years old versus Snowpack is a fairly new tool in a fairly new space. So the path is not as well lit, certainly. And we're still figuring out some of that kind of more subtle behavior. The other thing that I'd say is that it's really dependent on how much you've set up in your own tooling. So what Webpack lets you do is essentially whatever you want, right? You have a config file. You can define different rules and different plugins that all dictate the behavior of the code base. What we try and do is try and limit that pretty much to, you have to import something and then you have to tell us how you build that something. So a stop file or a view file, tell us how that works. But we don't give you as much control over, well, I want to import glob : image ? Width equals, you can really go to town with Webpack in a way that you can't with this tool because we're trying to see what they have had trouble with at scale and not make those same mistakes. So it really depends on how much magic you brought into your own configuration, untangling that and building it for a world that's a little more focused on trying to look like the browser and feel like the browser and not doing whatever you want via config. What's nice about the Rails community, where you all are in a good place, is that a lot of the ecosystem debt, like legacy debt, is around CommonJS and ESM interop. So old world and new world coming together, and Node itself is trying to make this transition now and starting to feel some real growing pains from that. But, for all the hate that is, people say like jQuery, blah, 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 or this maybe blah, 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 it's not real JavaScript. You're not like hashtag JavaScript. For all of that, it's as long as you've kept your tooling to a pretty simple space and a pretty constrained environment, you're actually now in a better position to kind of join this new ESM world where tooling isn't actually supposed to be doing that much. So if you're just like using dependencies and not running a ton of build tooling already, you're in really good shape versus someone who maybe has to claw their way out of a configuration hell that they've created for themselves.
If you've been listening to this show for a bit, then you know that Jason and Chris have a crush on Laravel, and I basically battle JavaScript for fun. Regardless of what end of the stack and what language, they all have one thing in common, and that's Honey Badger. Stop wasting time configuring your tools and focus on shipping, knowing that no matter where you are, Honey Badger has your back. Oh, and speaking of shipping, the Honey Badger blog has been on fire recently. Seriously, and I don't say this lightly. Some of the best technical writing you're going to find all in one place. So go check that out. And while you're there, sign up for Honey Badger. Let them know he sent you. Thank you so much to Honey Badger for continuing to sponsor Remote Ruby and for not killing me for all the JavaScript errors I sent you this weekend.
I think Webpack's really only like approachable to me because Rails was like, we're going to abstract the config and ship it. I've tried to sit down with pure Webpack and I don't know, maybe I'm not smart enough. I have trouble like applying all the configuration, like understanding how it all works together. And then Rails was like, here you go. And I was like, cool, I'll use Webpack. This is fine. That's
the exact paradigm. Like you shouldn't need a PhD to do web development. You shouldn't need to know how Webpack, like that is an opt-in performance optimization in our world. We say that bundling is still a great tool, but reach for it when you need it. If you're just building a site for friends, for family, an internal like company site, performance is it's not the end all be all. It's a great tool for a production site, but it's something that you can reach for when you're ready. So instead of trying to abstract and sit on top of a set of thousands of tools that we try and hide from you, we just say, don't even touch them until you're ready. And then when you're ready, you can look at something that's maybe a bit simpler, or maybe there's something that's constrained that problem into a nice wrap or a nice interface.
I obviously did not understand Webpack either. I feel like most people don't. And it wasn't until I started trying Snowpack, and then all of a sudden, all of the gears started shifting into place as I was like, okay, I'm trying to do this thing with Snowpack. What's going on? And then I'm looking back at my code and I'm like, this is weird. Why am I needing to do this in my code? The very first thing is, why am I importing CSS into my JavaScript file? And all of a sudden when I'm using Snowpack, I'm like, oh, I don't need to do that anymore. It's just kind of wild. The stuff that a lot of us are doing, and the only reason is because of the bundler, whatever we're using. Rails primarily uses Webpack, but I've tried Rollup. I know Connor Rogers is working with Avit and kind of exploring even going down to just straight Rollup. So it's a fun time, honestly. But yeah. I feel like a lot of this is kind of happening in the background because a lot of Rails developers are definitely the type of people that are like, okay, just let me know when you're done. Let me know when it's good, and then we'll check it out. Webpacker is a great example of that because for a lot of people, Webpacker, you install it and then you try to add jQuery and it doesn't work. And you're like, I have no idea what's going on. But really at the end of the day, the Webpacker gem is really just an interface to a massive config that the Webpacker NPM package is essentially wrapping. It's basically taking all these different configurations for all these different tools, Less and Sass and CoffeeScript and all this thing, and it's creating your Webpack config for you. Because otherwise we would have to be doing that ourselves.
Yeah. At first I guess it was Rails 6, when they said Webpacker is going to ship by default only for JavaScript. We're going to keep sprockets and the asset pipeline around for everything else. At first I was like, why would you do that? Webpack can do all the things. And then now I'm like, I kind of miss the asset pipeline sometimes. So yeah, it's fascinating.
I'm looking at Skypack and it's to me, it looks like, you know, an ESM version of NPM. And the second question that comes to mind is like, I have no idea about the scale or cost of these things, but I feel like it must be expensive to do this.
Weirdly cheap. I'd say our time as the people working on this is probably the most expensive.
Really?
Because there's caching, right? These things don't change. You actually get a really kind of fast CDN when you build for a set of dependencies that, you know, are published once and then used by millions of people.
Gotcha. So at least when I found Snowpack, y'all had a Patreon, and I was happy to donate to that because I was like, look, this dude might change my life. But that's not around anymore, I don't think. How are you like justifying, because you have at least 2 people, right, working with you on Skypack and Snowpack?
Yeah, we're a team of 4 now working on Skypack. We are new to a space that we don't fully understand. So we're going in pretty kind of eyes open. We're not really trying to make money as much as understand this new space and how we can fit in to help developers. That kind of Pika ethos is still alive and well within the team. But yeah, we see the need for loading dependencies on demand, leveraging this new ESM technology. We see a real space for that. So the similarities to NPM are not, you know, totally unintentional. There's a need for navigating this new space, whatever it ends up looking like.
So that reminded me of another thing. I have seen in the past people making stimulus packages or making various node packages and then trying to get it to work in their Rails app with Webpacker, and it doesn't work. And the reason is that they're not exporting it the way that lets the browser know that it is a module, or it can be used with modules, or it can be, I can't even remember all the other things that you can set in there. But what are kind of the differences in a package that you would just require from a script versus a ESM available package?
That's a really good question. There's no clear answer because so many people are doing different things right now. So especially if you've ever built a package, there's like this concept of, okay, well, let me tell everyone about what lives in this package. And main is reserved for what node listens to. So that's common.js. Module is what's like the ESM new stuff. And then browser has been around for so long. We're going to give you that like UMD loads just by putting it in a script tag, and now it's available on the window object. So you have just this buildup of a package can be many things. And for a long time, it's just been like, pick one, but probably do all of them. And then if any one of them is wrong, someone's going to complain. And again, that kind of PhD feeling comes back for what it takes to build a package. ESM introduces a nice kind of cut from that towards a world where everything is ESM. And so that's a little bit controversial, especially if you have a lot of tooling built up around maybe one of those other flows. But what's nice is that it doesn't mean you can't stop doing that. If a package is ESM, it's like the most high fidelity way that you could ship it because browsers need to be able to scan it. So it has this syntax that's really easy for any tool to scan and understand and then compile or build into whatever format you like. So it's one of those formats where it's a great like master copy, source copy that then you can turn into whatever else you want. It's that same problem where a lot of people in the space have been like, well, what should I publish my package? Should it be like the most modern code, or should it be something that will run on every browser? Because that's what my users want. Again, it lets you kind of say, this is the best copy available. It's the most modern copy available, but then you as the person can take this package and turn it into whatever you want. Downgrade it for the browsers that you want to support as your site, turn it into UMD or common.js or any other kind of previous module format. That's one of the cool features of Skypack is that it leans into that model. So Skypack has a virtue of serving every package. We actually differentially serve it based on your browser. So if you're in a really old browser, we will automatically compile it down to an older version for you. But if you're in like the latest Chrome or the latest Safari, we'll actually say, great, no transform needed. Give it like the most concise modern code that browser can understand.
And this is like a very slight aside, but can you tell me what the exports field in a package JSON is? Because I heard a lot about it. I have no idea what it is. It makes no sense. Okay.
I've been lost to time. No, I can tell a little bit, but it's a very new spec that's very flexible. So even I have trouble kind of getting it out there.
Gotcha. You don't have to try if you don't want to. I definitely put you on the spot. I thought about that and I was like, I don't remember where I've seen it, but I was like, do I need to worry about, is this something I need to care about? And I was like, I don't know, because when I read the explanation, I'm like, I still have no idea.
Yeah, now I'm worried I've gone too far and been too facetious. It's not that hard. It's just it's so open-ended that like, if all you want to do is say like exports is a string, it's the main file in my package that you should use, That's actually fine. That's good for most people. Where people run into trouble is that it's this large object of options that are supported. So you can say, my exports are here and here, and based on your environment, it's here and here. And you can really take it pretty far. What's nice about why it is a feature worth pursuing is that it is the first time that a package has ever been able to say, these are the like entry points and everything else is private. So the problem that a lot of packages will run into is they have, okay, here's my main kind of index, the main entry point. But then I have these other 10 files that power it. So they're my private internal source of this package. I want to get my nice interface in this one file. Everything else is private. That's how I built it. It's the implementation details. Up until this export field, anyone could reach into any file they wanted. So people would start to rely like, oh, they built this great function. I love this. I'm going to rely on this individually. And then that package out there has no idea that they've done that. It's not a part of what they've committed to supporting. So next thing you know, they move that function somewhere else. They change it. Whole thing breaks. The exports map is a really good way to just say, this is my entry interface. Everything else is private. And tooling can then say, if you try to load anything outside of what's defined here, we're not going to let you.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense because there have definitely been times where I try to import something and it doesn't work according to the documentation. I'm like, what the heck? And then suddenly I'm like adding slashes onto my import statement and getting down into the package and manually selecting one that does work.
Yeah.
And I've also seen a lot of instances where people are accidentally, I think, shipping way more code than they think they are. And that can definitely have a major impact on your bundle size and all of the stuff and things. So
yeah, it's one of those features that exists to stop you from doing something. So I think a lot of people also come at it from like their first experiences. Wait, why is this thing telling me I can't do this? It's a real problem that package authors face. And then tooling can really optimize when it knows the interface of a package. It's very similar to that ESM mantra of if we can scan it and analyze it, we can optimize it. So it's tougher to communicate, but if it's overwhelming, all you need to know is it can just be a string. You don't even need to go down that rabbit hole of objects and interfaces. Just tell the package where your file lives, that main file, and you're good to go.
Gotcha. So going back to Snowpack, not too many releases ago, y'all released basically kind of the beginnings of server-side rendering, the ability to do that with Snowpack. And that is what would enable us to use it. I've never actually tried it because I just haven't had the chance to, but I'm pretty sure I know exactly and could very easily get Snowpack to replace Webpack in a Rails app. Because at the end of the day, Webpacker is just compiling all of your JavaScript and all of your CSS or SCSS and all your stuff and things into a public folder that a lot of people kind of ignore for a little while. But it all gets bundled into those folders. So and that's what Rails is like, okay, I'm looking in these folders and I expect these folders to have the JavaScript that you've said they have. And so with Snowpack, there's a concept of a mount and you can say, hey, all the files in this path I want you to export them to this other path. So that's how you could say, okay, in my app JavaScript, blah, 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 all that needs to go into public when Snowpack compiles. What do we get with the server-side rendering stuff that y'all have been kind of working on?
That's a pretty good summary of it. If you think of what Webpack's doing, it's taking your source files, doing some stuff, and then outputting it to a place. Snowpack does the same thing. It just does less as a part of that. So tell Snowpack where your source files are, tell them where that like public output place is, and Snowpack will run. It'll run in like a watch mode. It'll run in a kind of final build mode. It would give you that one-to-one build output as you develop into that public place. I know a few people have been working on a Rails Snowpack, like Snowpacker integration. I think Connor, that you mentioned earlier, is I think a part of that, or has at least poked around in that before. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny because I actually showed it to him and then he has definitely gone above and beyond. I've been more interested in it from just the static site side because I was like, I don't want to use Babel. I don't even sometimes know what Babel is doing. And I don't want to like import CSS into JavaScript. That doesn't even make sense. So I've kind of focused more on it from a very much lower level. He kind of went straight for that. But what's interesting is I'm not actually sure you need a gem like that because at the end of the day, the only real thing you need is to tell Rails to basically accept that CORS header in development. It's like, hey, or not. if you're running the Snowpack dev server, it would run just like the Webpack dev server in a port that you specify. But I guess if you're running it in watch mode, now that I think about it, it's just always going to be outputting those files into your folders. So you don't even need any of that. I'm not sure you even need a gem to do.
Yeah, it's a flexible tool. So it's like you could tell Snowpack where to output it from and then have Rails pick that up and you're good to go. Or you could have something server side running, like when this request comes in, proxy it to the dev server and actually on demand load them. There's a couple of different ways you could be doing it. It's a very flexible tool.
And I just thought about this. Have you seen anyone trying to use CoffeeScript yet?
No, I haven't seen CoffeeScript in a while.
Okay.
It always has a place in my heart, but I don't think anyone's asked for a plugin just yet.
The interesting thing is the way y'all have been kind of architecting Snowpack is in such I think it's well architected. I don't know a lot about JavaScript, but I am keenly watching the Snowpack repo all the time. And it's in TypeScript. So you've got all the benefits of that. If you're using it, you can write a plugin for Snowpack very easily. And when I say that, I'm like really mean very easily, something that you could do as a Rails developer. I don't think anyone's going to try to write a Webpack plugin. That seems terrible, but I've seen people adding their own Snowpack plugins and the code is super simple. I love it. So that's an option, right?
We get to embrace that. Again, like a lot of our wins are just that we chose a really simple model. So the whole idea of like single file builds, what is a plugin? It's give me some input and I'm going to build it and I'm going to shoot it out and that's it. So like the Babel plugin is, most plugins are less than 100 lines, easy. Because all they need to do is say like, Snowpack's going to give you a file at this file name and do whatever your thing is that you like to do. And then just give us the output and we'll be good to go. We handle the stitching. We can assume ESM as this like syntax that we can understand. It really simplifies a lot about what has traditionally been a really kind of complex model. We borrow from Rollup if you've used Rollup before. So actually they get a lot of credit for, even as a bundler, they started to explore just much simpler paradigms.
Right. And we are getting close to time. So I'll ask you one other question that Connor actually sent me. Do you think the web is ever going to adopt a universal bundler now that ESM is fully specced out? Or are we always going to be in this situation where if you need it, you're going to have to find it somewhere?
It's a really interesting framing. Bundling is one of those things where everyone wants different things. Some people want a ton of flexibility. Some people want a ton of just simplicity. I don't know if there'll ever be one bundler to rule them all in the same way Webpack has been, because Webpack really was it let us use NPM code. That was like, it was a bundler, but like really what it let us do was say like import React and that meant something. So no, I don't think there'll ever be a tool like it in that same way again. But I think what's really interesting, especially as IE 11 fades away and we enter this world of modern browsers getting these like greenfield updates so that there aren't like really enterprises using IE 11 the same way in this modern world. Like it's a security imperative to actually update regularly. I think we'll see a world that's much more modern. And so as browsers start to explore what it means to have ESM in the browser, what does it mean to solve some of these performance problems around how quickly the browser can go and load your whole dependency tree. Import maps for like import React actually means something to the browser. There's all these really cool features that I think will just challenge the idea of how much tooling is required. If Snowpack goes away at the end of the day because the browsers have figured this out and you don't even need it, like I will rest happily. It's what I like about the project is we can kind of just melt into the platform that is being developed.
Gotcha.
This was really insightful for me because I've heard of Skypack from DHH. I've heard of Snowpack just from following Connor on Twitter. I'm not one, apparently, I guess, to go like, when it comes to JavaScript, I'm not one that like rushes out and tries new things, I guess. But this has me really excited to go look at it. Webpack has been a good tool for me because it allowed me to embrace ES6, which I really wanted to do.
Right.
We couldn't do that really well with our old asset bundling in Rails. But then I never took the time to learn Webpack, so I've made huge messes. This sounds like saving grace, and I'm really excited. So I learned a lot just from listening to y'all's conversation. So I appreciate you joining us. And
yeah. And I think what y'all mentioned about you don't need to be an early adopter. This is just coming down the pipe. Like I think we passed the point of once you try this out, it's really hard to go back. Yeah, especially with DHCH tweeting about this kind of thing. I think it's only kind of forwards from here. So if this all sounds cool, I'm sure just it'll only get easier to use and more kind of mainstream as we go.
Yeah, I will say I've been working on an admin interface for Rails, and one of the pain points has been for the longest time is like you ship some Ruby code, but it needs some assets. And that hasn't been anything like way back in the day with the asset pipeline. You would just download the JavaScript and CSS and put it in a Ruby library, and then it would be there. But then you had to constantly update that thing. And that was just a strange way of packaging stuff. And then the Webpacker stuff comes out, but you can't easily include things from a gem in Ruby through Webpacker. So that was kind of off the table. And I was stuck for a long time on like, how am I going to build this library that needs JavaScript and CSS? And then learn about ESM and Skypack from Andrew. And he was like, look at this, you can just import it from the web. And I'm like, wait a minute, we could probably ship all of the CSS and JavaScript for this thing and not touch any of the Ruby side of things. And it just works. And that was amazing. Now I can do all this stuff without dealing with bundlers or any of this. And it just magically works. So I haven't used Snowpack yet, but Skypack on its own is just tremendous if you're building a library like that needs something, because you don't want to have to tell your user, okay, go configure all this stuff and manually import and add these node modules and manage it yourself. Now as the library developer, you can just say, hey, it's all done for you. Don't worry about it. And that was a godsend. That was amazing. Because the first time I tried that and it worked, I was like, whoa, like my users are going to love this.
It's a very different world.
Yeah. I'm just so excited about all this because it's removing kind of the problems that we've always had with in the Rails world of like, we want to ship something that includes some CSS and JavaScript. There's never a good way of doing that. But now we can specify the version number and the package name and all that just in the URL, and voila, it's good to go. And you can choose when to update it as the library author and whatever. And it just is so easy now. So huge props for all that. And thanks for all your work on this stuff. It's awesome.
Oh, really appreciate that. And yeah, if this has come off as like, it's easy to punch up at Webpack because it's such a big, it is defined the last 10 years. So I feel like at least obligated to say we are standing on their shoulders. Certainly it's everything that we've been able to do is to take what they've given us in terms of one shared NPM ecosystem, millions of packages, and build on top of that. So it's all part of the journey to get here, but it's exciting times ahead, we think.
One last thing I feel like we should mention is that we talked this entire time about running with unbundled dependencies and not using Babel, but you can use Babel and you can bundle with Snowpack if you choose to, right?
Yep. You can use Babel, you can use Webpack at the end of it. It's all about pushing that complexity kind of either if you want it, and then for bundling specifically only for when you build for that final user at that last stage of the build.
Right. Yeah. I thought I was going to have to use Babel, but then I realized that I had an issue with Firefox, and I realized it's because I told Snowpack to use ES 2020, even though I have no idea what ES 2020 means, but I was like, it's the latest. It must be the greatest.
It's a high number.
Right. I was like, it has to be cool.
2020 was a trash year though.
That is true. But I figured out there's something that Firefox is not like about the ES 2020 situation. And I think literally just telling Snowpack, hey, don't use ES 2020, use ES 2017, I think. And problem solved.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. So V3, the coolest thing that we launched was our own internal bundler powered by ES Build. If you've ever heard of that project, is like a super new, like really fast bundler. So again, all in that spirit of if you don't need to look at it, we'll just give you a really simple optimization flow where it's as simple as tell us what you're targeting. You can even just tell us like the Firefox version and it would understand that's ES 2019 or whatever you ended up having to pick. But then like, the nice part about being pluggable is or use Webpack or use Rollup, use whichever tool you want to kind of get the job done that you need.
Well, I like both of them, very appreciative of all your work and of everything you're doing for the community. Can you tell people if they're interested in this, where they can find you, where they can find your projects?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter as Fred K. Schott, and Snowpack and Skypack are both on Twitter at their respective names, I think with JS at the end. But if you search for them, you will find them. Yeah, plenty to do there. So if you're a contributor looking for something fun to work on, would love your help on Snowpack, especially anyone in the Rails community who wants to make this easier. That Rails integration story is such an exciting part of this for the people who don't need JavaScript tooling to just get rid of it entirely is a pretty exciting time. So please do, get involved if you're excited about this with us.
There you go, folks. Get involved. Fred, thank you so much. I feel indebted to you already for the amount of time you saved me. So I'm excited for more and more people to find out about this.
Right on.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Guys, I talk to you next week.
Awesome. Thanks for being on.